Hello everyone and welcome to another video in a series of realist evaluation workshops. Today we're going to be looking at the how and why conversation. So thanks for joining us. So the how and why conversation, I'm here with Kev Harris, Dr. Kev Harris, and we're going to be looking at what we call a how and why conversation within a realist evaluation, sometimes known as a how and why evaluation. And in its simplest terms, a how and why conversation can be seen as an interview or a small focus group, as you would with similar traditional evaluations. So the only difference really is that the focus on how and why is to really encourage us to look a bit deeper. And I don't know if Kev, if you've got any opening thoughts on what a how and why conversation is.
Yeah, thanks, Louis, and thanks everybody for joining for this workshop, this bite-sized workshop. I think the how and why conversation is something that falls under the testing phase of a realist evaluation in terms of investigating, scrutinizing, exploring our assumptions and beliefs or our explanatory statements. And one of the things that we're trying to do here is try to make the realist evaluation approach as attractive, but also as applicable to as many people as possible. So in an academic journal, for example, you wouldn't see anything about a how and why conversation. They would be referred to as a realist interview or a realist focus group. And Anna Manzano from Leeds University has been instrumental in terms of helping to shape and develop this sort of stuff. So that's the only kind of introductory comment I would make, Louis, is that the how and why conversation, we have them all the time. I know we're going to talk about this a little bit more as we go on through our chat, but the how and why conversation is something that anyone can do. It's accessible to anyone, and that's the key thing that we want to try and encourage through our discussion today.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. The opportunity to make it accessible for everyone, and really get people having conversations, as they do. Practitioners, instructors, coaches, volunteers all have these conversations with participants, with stakeholders, policymakers. So we just want to see how we can focus it in some contexts to help contribute to the evaluation and deeper understanding of the program, the intervention, the initiative. So yeah, I think it's a really open and positive way to try and do this. So just to break it down a little bit, idea of our assumptions and beliefs of how our program works. The how and why conversation looks to present these ideas to people. By people, these might be the participants, they might be the stakeholders. But rather than just saying, oh, we believe that the program works in this way, what do you think? It's a case of almost breaking it down. So some of our assumptions might be around the physical activity leader being local to that area. So rather than having the whole theory about, oh, it's important for the leader to be local so that local people feel like they can go attend and they associate with the coach and that's why they continue to participate. It might just be questions about, okay, what is important to you in the physical activity leader? And they could start to share their ideas around what is important to them. And for us, it helps us in terms of what we believe in our assumption and belief, and whether that's being reaffirmed. Is that true? Is it different for different people? And then we can start to dig a little bit deeper. And as people open up about the how and why, we can start to see the ideas of how the program works for them or doesn't work for them as well.
So, and I think Louis, it's about as well. It's about starting with our assumptions and beliefs or our explanatory statements that we want to explore and investigate, and looking at how we can turn those theories into questions that help us to present those theories to people. And that's where you just allow them to open up and start to respond around, okay, well, what do you make of this? How does this actually play out for you? And they'll give some responses, and then you can start to build deeper and start to say, right, okay, well, how is that the case? Why does that play out in this way for you? And what is it about where you live or your environment or your own individual or community circumstances, for example, that start to kind of like shape this.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think the complexity of an evaluation can often be quite off-putting. So I just wondered, Kev, if you could just talk about this, the idea that it explores complexity of a program, but the conversation itself is not necessarily complex.
Yeah, so what I suppose what I mean by that is in a lot of the How Am I conversational training that we've carried out, Louis, across the country, and particularly within Essex, we've encountered some of the challenges with people doing evaluations that draw upon complexity. But one of the things that we're trying to say here is that we have complex conversations with people all the time. So for example, if we're talking about the Women's World Cup, or we're talking about a game that England had, or something along those lines, just giving a sport example, someone would say, okay, well, what did you make of the game last night? And that immediately turns into, it gives people a platform to start to open up around these sorts of things. We use complexity driven language all the time as well, such as that there's something about that person, and we talk about this in some of our previous workshops, but there's something about this, or I'm not quite sure about that, we need to dig deeper. So the point is that people talk more than just outcomes all of the time. The hows and the whys are driven all of the time through the conversations that we have. So therefore, why should we not do that within our own evaluations, for example? So that's what I suppose I mean by that.
Yeah, no, I think it can be really impactful, powerful to have those stories and to understand more. And the idea of someone saying that a program's changed their life, we've seen this so many times, but the opportunity to understand the causality behind this, the how and the why this program's changed their life, their individual circumstances, the role that different people have played, different programs have played, and how this has happened, gives us an opportunity to really understand and learn from this, so that it could potentially inform what we do in the future as well.
Yeah.
And I think we've got an example here of an assumption of how a program might work, that we're gonna try and break down into how we might ask some questions and have a how and why conversation around this. So for those that might just listen, I'll read it out. So if we can provide alternative forms of education for disadvantaged young people who don't always engage in formal education, via people who are cultural intermediaries, can enhance their employability and educational aspiration, because the young people are able to learn at their own pace and environments that are comfortable for them. I think just key to point out, by cultural intermediaries, we mean people in the community or different areas that are almost like connecting people. They share the same values or the same culture as potentially the target group. And they can really associate with them, and are often seen as connecting people between an organisation, whether that's a physical activity organisation and the target group. So, Kev, it'd be tell me, let's find out, how do we break this down into a how and why conversation?
Yeah. So for example, if you were to do a how and why conversation, we would probably recommend that you went into the how and why conversation with, I would say, I mean, there's no right or wrong, but I would say no more than maybe 3 or 4 explanatory statements or theories that you wanted to put to the test. And the overall outcome, I suppose, or where you want to get to, is you want to get to a point where you have presented these theories or these explanatory statements to the people that you're having the conversation with, so that they can so they can either confirm them, reject them, verify them, or as what we do in a realist evaluation, we look to refine our theories. So for example, with this theory here, which is about this cultural intermediary, we've got this young person, for example, who's been expelled from lots of different schools, perhaps because they just don't fit in with formal education. There's this kind of idea that if we can provide a different form of education within a setting that might be suitable to them, for example, or with someone who they look up to, because that person, one of the characteristics of cultural intermediaries, like you just said, Louis, is someone who, has walked to the same walk, they come from the same roots, they share the same kind of, values and all those sorts of things. So it's about, trying to really put that to the test. And the way to break this theory down would be to just split it down into just a few questions where you start to really zone in on certain components of the theory so that people can talk about it. And one of the first starting points is that, if we were to do a how and why conversation here, Louis, which obviously we haven't really got the time to do, but if we were to do this, we would start to really ask the question at the beginning. If you were the young person and I was the interviewer or the person leading on the how and why conversation, I would ask you to just talk a little bit about your background. Talk to me a little bit about, how did you get engaged in this? And then as we move on, I start to say, okay, right, that's really interesting. So can you tell me, what is it about the importance of the cultural intermediary? So I wouldn't necessarily say the cultural intermediary. I would say, what is it about Kev, for example, who is this educational person who's coming in? He's a sports coach. What is it about him that's helping you enhance your employability? Is it something about you learning at your own pace? What do you make of that? How do you feel about that? So immediately that theory is started to be, put on the table and open for scrutiny. And we're not asking for people to, confirm it or influencing what is said, because that's absolutely not the case with a how and why conversation, but it keeps us on track with what we're looking to test. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's very helpful. And I'm just wondering, so for someone coming in and interviewing, it can be really helpful to say have this theory, if they don't necessarily know the people involved. But what if you're working on the project or you're quite closely involved and you're trying to have these how and why conversations? Would these staff or individuals, would they be able to sort of use some of their own knowledge about what's going on or experience to sort of help shape some of these questions as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we have what we would call the very rigid traditionalist evaluators who kind of like have the view that if you're going to do an interview with someone or you're going to conduct something with someone, it needs to be by someone independent and all those sorts of things. Yes, there is value to that, but providing that there is the appropriate support for these people who are embedded, providing that there is that kind of willingness to understand the pros and the cons of what goes on, the contextual kind of knowledge, or the understanding of how the program works, or the understanding of the relationships and all those sorts of things, brings so much potential for people actually embedded doing these how and why conversations. And let's not forget either that with some of these more hard to reach groups, to open up and talk about their experiences and how they feel, they might feel much more comfortable talking to people in this particular way. So why should we not be able to use that as an opportunity to bring some of those findings to life?
Oh, brilliant. And I just think in terms of the things that this might bring out, we mentioned resources that might be necessary for things to work for these young people. And by this, Kev, it'd just be interesting to see, is this always going to be obvious, or could this potentially be things that are a bit different, things that might not be in the intended out let me rephrase. Is it things that might be intended throughout the program, throughout the initiative, or could these be resources that are unintended or things that are outside of the program's control as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the beauty of the how and why conversation, is because you're putting to test a theory or an explanatory statement, but as the conversation develops and as it flows through its kind of like informal development, it could be that there's lots of other contextual dimensions here within this theory that are really important. So Louis, me and you have played this out before in other examples, and when we've kind of had this conversation, there's things there about the background of the individual, as to what is it about their circumstances that is forced them or has led them to where they are, where they're just not in formal education. What is it about the relationships that maybe they have with other men, or in this case this could be a male peer for this person, because obviously we haven't been specific about the gender here, but it could be female to female. It could be that there's very they've got a really troubled background in terms of how they've engaged with certain people in their lives, and there's different reasonings and reactions that might start to play out in terms of the because element in here as well. So that then therefore helps us to build more explanatory understanding around what's going on, which is where it's so valuable.
Awesome. And just to finish off, it would be interesting to get some of your thoughts on these around the benefits of this approach, because obviously trying new things out can be quite challenging, doesn't necessarily always bring about what we might perceive as success in an interview or these conversations for collecting data. But I guess we're keen to stress the benefits of how it can help understand the causality, the how and why of our programs as well. And
Yeah.
I think you've just mentioned there the contextual understanding is so important, and not just assuming what these people might go through or their background and how they became involved, but that these conversations can really help to illuminate a lot of this as well.
Yeah, absolutely, Louis. And I think through our experiences of doing this sort of stuff, is that we would always say that a realist focus to an evaluation helps us to not just say this works or this doesn't work, and that's that in terms of that outcome. It helps us to go deeper into explaining, why are these outcomes manifesting themselves in this particular way. What is it about the environment, the circumstances, the conditions that surround these places where we're working with, that are starting to factor and make sense of that outcome. So that's the first point, which we've talked about a number of times. But the how and why conversation for us is something that is very participatory. So why, if understanding how and why something is working is really important, then why should it not be the business or the interest for a wide range of stakeholders? So for us, in terms of doing in terms of looking into this sort of stuff, why should we not be able to say, right, the interview or the how and why conversation, it could be anywhere between 20 minutes, it could be up to an hour, and there needs to be some flexibility for people to be able to embed this what we call evaluative thinking into our work, rather than thinking, oh, we have to separate it out per se. So that's what I would like to, that's how I would add to that.
Well, absolutely, absolutely agree with you there. And I think just to finish off, the stories can be used within the for not just evaluation reports, but really supporting organizations, programs with their whole evidence base. So this might be a case study. It might be a story of change, but these are also things that can be promoted and used to share learning and to share stories, whether it's looking for funding as well, sharing things on social media, and to really advertise projects as well, the real stories that are going on where suitable, of course. So going a little bit deeper and understanding that can give it quite a personal feel, to promote further programs as well.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you for your time today, Kev. Really appreciate it, and hope everyone's enjoyed listening.
And just the only other thing I'd add to that, Louis, is that if anyone is interested in how and why conversational training, would like to have more information around it, then feel free to contact us, and we'd be more than happy to talk about it and what it can do for your evaluations and just general practice.